All right, well, we're here at the SSA Convention 2025 with Eliana. Hi, Eliana.
Hello.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Is this your first convention?
It is.
SSA? It is.
Yep.
Okay, so you have not been to one of these at all.
Nope.
I'm the convention veteran in this context, I guess. And you are from Kentucky,
yep.
right? Well, you tell everybody you're from Kentucky, right?
Mm-hmm.
From Richmond. And but you've just graduated from college. Which school?
About a year ago. Eastern Kentucky University.
Oh, Eastern Kentucky. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I guess the question is, what brought you here? Tell me about your story, your background, and why you're at your first SSA convention.
Yeah, I grew up in a very conservative Christian home. My father's a former Southern Baptist minister. I'm the youngest of 5, all girls.
Youngest of 5, all girls.
Yeah.
Wow. And when you say, if I might ask a few details here and there, you said former. So does that mean he's retired or he's okay? Former just means he's retired.
Yes.
So if they retire, they're considered former at that point. Okay. Mm-hmm. Got it. Because he's not like pastoring a church.
Right.
All right. So what is that like then, I guess, as far as just did you think when you were in 9th grade, oh, I think I'm no longer really believing this stuff? Because usually if you're growing up in a Christian home, you tend to go along with the program. My parents were divorced, but I knew already in like 5th grade, 6th grade that I was not convinced God existed already by then, and then through high school I was an atheist. So
took me a lot longer.
Okay.
I was still, even if we weren't actively in church, I was still I would consider myself religious up until probably around maybe senior year of high school. But even then, as I was becoming less conservative and becoming more progressive, I still would have said that I believed in God. And it took probably another year or 2 after that to finally label myself an atheist.
Okay. And then since then you've thought of yourself as an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
It sounded like you were in sort of political, you shifted politically first. Is that correct?
Yes.
And was there any motive for that, do you think? Just the interactions with people, culture in general? What was the appeal there?
I think the catalyst was because I grew up in a conservative home, being LGBTQ was never an option. That was very much so a big sin. I knew that from a very young age. I was told that. So when it finally got to the point, I was 17 and I kind of couldn't deny who I was anymore.
Yeah.
And so that for me was like a turning point because I finally realized, well, clearly it's not a choice because I wouldn't have chosen it, not in the house I grew up in. So that was kind of like a turning point for me, and that was kind of like the first brick to crumble. And then from then on, I started kind of evaluating everything else, and then it all just shifted.
Okay. So that was sort of the catalyst, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Understandable one. And were you sort of doing this like privately because you didn't want it to be obvious while you were at home?
Yeah.
And then by the time you were in university and you were thinking of yourself as an atheist, I think by then, right? So were you then, but you're still living at home, and your parents, you were still going to church?
No, we hadn't regularly attended church. My father retired from ministry for health reasons, so he wasn't really able to attend church for quite a while, and so my mother didn't attend because he wasn't attending, and so we weren't expected to either. So we just hadn't attended for probably a few years by the time I finally.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming they're a little older since there was a gap.
Yes. They're both in their mid upper 60s.
So you not going to church didn't. I guess he would have still thought it would be ideal if you did.
Yeah, he would have preferred that we went, but because he wasn't going, I guess he didn't feel like he could kind of tell us that we needed to go.
Right.
As long as we still believed.
Yeah. And your mom probably had the same kind of attitudes. So somewhere in there you had to reckon with, there's your identity there's those issues. Then you have the political sort of stuff. Then you have your parents' views. But at some point, you had to have had sort of an internal search of just sort of what do I really think about all this, and even independent from LGBTQ issues, you must have had some sort of what do I really think about this Bible stuff and Jesus and all that kind of stuff, and what was that like?
Um, well, like I said, it kind of tipped off when I, realized I was a lesbian. Like I had to start questioning that part first, and so then okay, there's the passages in the Bible that that condemn that, so I had to evaluate that first. And that's when people were like, well, it's been interpreted wrong or it's been translated wrong. And so I kind of was looking at that first, and I was like, well, if that could be misconstrued or mistranslated or whatever else, what else could be? And so I think kind of one of the next things that I looked at was like things that in the past had kind of bothered me, but when I'd ask my dad, because he was a pastor, his answer was basically, we're not to question God. It's not for us to reason why. But evaluating like the way that the Bible talks about women, the fact that the Bible like essentially condones slavery and stuff like that, I just kind of started looking at those and kind of picking it apart piece by piece. And then the more I looked into it and saw things, the more there's like contradictions, and it kind of all came tumbling down that way.
What years roughly were those? In university, early university, late high school?
So it started late high school, and then it was a journey. It took up a year or two to finally get all the way to atheist. There you go.
What was the main resources that you were using to do this kind of a search? Were you just poring over these passages yourself? Were you on YouTube or TikTok, or where were you getting information to just even think about it?
Yeah, I would say YouTube and TikTok were two big ones. I found some like atheist creators like Hemant Mehta with Friendly Atheist. That was a resource I used quite a bit. I watched Telltale Atheist. Found a theologian, Dan McClellan, started watching his stuff as well, and those are mainly my resources. People that knew more than I did about the stuff.
Yeah, and it sort of just felt obvious that they knew more when you were...
Yeah, they cited sources. They had, the positive reputations and the actual knowledge and degrees to go along with what they were talking about.
Did you find that you were mostly just agreeing, or were you skeptical? Because the atmosphere here at SSA, of course, is to promote a kind of healthy skepticism in general, especially toward religion. So did you feel like you were being skeptical both sides, or did you feel a little bit more like it was appealing to hear this debunking?
At the beginning, I was very skeptical because I definitely, at the beginning when I first started looking at these people, I wouldn't have called myself an atheist. I would have still considered myself religious, but just more progressive. And so I felt defensive at times for sure, because I was like, these are things that I believed since forever. And but the more I watched, the more they were making sense, and I realized that was more logical than the way that I'd been thinking. I'd say now when I watch them, I'm a lot more just like agreeing with them, because I also know I have other knowledge outside of what they're talking about. Like I know the sources they're talking about too, and I go and look at the articles they reference and stuff like that.
Yeah. Was there anybody on the Christian side, or what were the voices on the Christian side that you were trying to look into to counter the Telltale Atheist or Herman Mehta? Is that his name? Herman Mehta?
Hemant Mehta.
Hemant. Oh yeah, it's Hemant. Yeah, Hemant Mehta. He's the Friendly Atheist anyway. But or maybe you weren't. I'm just curious. Were there, sort of apologists on the Christian side, or voices you were looking to see how they responded, like even just literally response videos or whatever? What would have been those sources, or weren't there any? I don't know.
I watched some, especially at the beginning, of like progressive ministers, reverends, stuff like that, they were obviously promoting like inclusivity and everything, but they didn't really have like, I guess, an argument in rebuttal. as to why like the Bible was right or they were right, so much as just like kind of a love everyone attitude.
So by the time you were sort of exploring that side of the integrity of the Bible, let's call it, you were at that point not really going back to Southern Baptist world to look at their opinions about the Bible and what they said, like in defense of its integrity. You were at that point only looking for either the progressive Christian sort of defense of the integrity of the Bible, or you were listening to the atheist side. That was really what the choice was between at that point, was a progressive form of Christianity.
Yes.
Okay. So do you feel like when you were looking at lesbianism, I think that was one of your first things you were talking about, how you started doing that. Mm-hmm. So was that just on your own at that point, or was that also in light of, like, who were you referring to at that point? Do you recall? Because kind of like the earliest stage you were talking about.
Yeah, I think that's when I kind of first saw some of the more progressive, like, ministers and reverends and stuff being like, being gay is not a sin. It's not, the Bible doesn't necessarily condemn homosexuality, or, that it does, but that's outdated and written by man and not, accurate. And so I kind of saw that first and thought, okay, well, I can be a lesbian and be Christian. I can do both. I just have to change the type of, I guess, Christianity that I'm following.
Yeah. Were these were YouTube basically?
YouTube or TikTok, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask, is one of them was the more likely source, TikTok or YouTube?
At the beginning, I would say more TikTok, but the more that I got interested in it, was really starting to like deconstruct. It was more YouTube, more longer form content.
I was going to say, is that because it's more long? Am I right? I'm sorry, I'm ignorant about TikTok, but doesn't TikTok now have some longer form stuff too?
Yeah, I think the limit for how many minutes it can be is a lot longer. But at the time, I think the limit was probably around like 2 minutes.
At the time, it was really just a question of, you knew YouTube was long form and TikTok was less.
Yes.
Okay. And did you find yourself during those times, or since, I don't know, have you found yourself at any point of that journey saying, I really want to read all the Gospels and really think about this? Or was it more just verses isolated here and there based on the videos you were watching and stuff?
I would say more like the isolated, but I watched some that are more long form, where they're taking like a whole section and talking about it, and talking about like what the original translation is and what conservative Christians would say this means, but what like a counter of it would be as well.
Yeah, okay. But that's still like through Dan McClellan or someone like that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Were you reading the Bible before that? Did you regularly read the Bible and have some knowledge of it?
I did. Yeah, I would say definitely early high school. I think kind of in an attempt to, I guess, essentially pray the gay away. If I could read the Bible and be a good Christian, then like the temptation would be taken away.
Okay.
So I was definitely more like reading it then.
And this is in what part do you think of high school is this roughly?
Freshman, sophomore year, maybe even early junior year.
Okay, so really by that point you already were thinking you're lesbian.
Trying to deny and ignore that, but yeah, it was kind of coming to the forefront.
Okay. So what would be your view then now of, you just basically take the view of like the sort of Bart, do you know who Bart Ehrman is? No. So your view of the scripture is that the Bible is sort of outdated. The stuff it said just was relevant to that time and sort of man-made, and it's kind of irrelevant, or that people have just misunderstood it. And that, in other words, do you take more the progressive or the conservatives are kind of right that it says what it says, but they're just wrong that it still applies?
I would say in a lot of cases, I mean, they're right in terms of it says what it says. Those verses are there, and there are instances where like it is a translation error or like a misunderstanding of the context. Usually when they try to like justify where it says something particularly bad. But I just generally think it's written by man. People wrote it to the way that any like religion or myth comes about, that they're trying to explain the world around them and trying to find a way to kind of cope with the way the world is and with death and stuff like that. And so they make this stuff up and they write it, and it can be manipulated by people who are trying to get a certain point across, or rulers trying to get people to listen to them. And yeah.
Do you think if you sort of isolated, if you isolated the LGBT passages and had the other stuff, the Gospel of Matthew or something like that, would you think that there'd still be things that have an appeal to you in that had an appeal at some point earlier in life, other than that issue? Or
Sure. I think, in terms of like the Gospels, Jesus has an appeal. He's very much so more about love and compassion, and he who's without sin cast the first stone. Like very like, I guess kind of he's more the ideal of progressive Christianity, and like going and doing good and helping others. Old Testament maybe not so much. A lot of God's wrath and killing people. But I think the Jesus idea is still a good one. I think in terms of, I guess, looking at it from more of like a storytelling standpoint, as like a character, he's the good guy. He's compelling. He's someone that you could look up to.
And not only, by the way, his famous verses about love your neighbor are actually from Leviticus, the Old Testament, which is I always find a little ironic, I guess, because of the general perception that God is mean in the Old Testament, as you were saying.
Yeah.
Which I understand why that's the perception. But do you think, other than the love your neighbor, what else would there be to look up to?
When people are asking him, how do I get to heaven? He says, like, sell your worldly possessions, pick up your cross, follow me. He talks about, like, welcoming people, like, taking care of others. His whole passage about you'll get into heaven based on what you do to me, where he's like, what you've done for the least of these, you've done for me, clothing and letting them into your house and things like that, yeah.
Do you, like, when I read the Gospels, I do notice he also talks about eternal punishment. Even in the passages quoted, he does refer to eternal punishment there. So do you think of those as just he had the traditional view and that part was not good? Or is that, because I often when people are characterizing him, I sometimes think, I wonder if they've forgotten that he did say quite a bit about judgment and the idea of justice and so on.
Yeah, I guess I kind of look two ways at that. I think, like, in one way, I think there is probably a subsect of the population where, like, eternal punishment doesn't sound like a horrible idea. People who do really heinous things. I think it's that idea of justice. You kind of feel like it's a righteous punishment, I guess. But, then you think, well, by what standard is that done, and who decides who gets what punishment? And so then it's kind of like not great. But, I don't think he's perfect, but I think he had good points.
Yeah, one thing that's clear is, because people will sometimes talk about the judgment in the Bible, and I'm like, well, I think it's pretty clear in the Bible that the people aren't the ones, humans aren't really the ones in charge of the judgment.
Yeah.
Not the final, like, true judgment, which is good. It's interesting because when you think of, when I hear the word justice, I think that's a very positive word that everybody really likes. But it's also a word you hear here at the convention and so on. But justice does, when we think of our systems of justice, it's not punishment free.
Right.
So I thought it was, so you really struck me as saying something kind of commonsensical, but it's not always said, which is there's some aspects of this idea of punishment, maybe even eternal punishment, that might be appropriate. And then, of course, it's true on the other side of eternal deliverance or forgiveness or whatever. I always think that the fact that his main stuff was healing people, that's mostly, like when they talk about miracles, it's like 99.9% he just healed people.
Yeah.
I think if he had levitated the temple, it would have been like, oh, okay, it's magical.
Yeah.
But what does it do for anybody? But if you heal somebody who's a leper or who's paralyzed or blind, then it's like, oh, well, that really helps people, So it makes more sense why there'd be an appeal there.
Yeah.
Do you, what then, when you think of, you must have felt like your big goals of life or the framework of your life were kind of within the Christian worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And once that's kicked to the curb, what then did you do?
Yeah, there's definitely a period of time of like I don't know what to do, because that was like a very big part of my life, and now it's like, well, I don't, I'm realizing I don't believe in that anymore, and that's not, what I want to do, and I'm like, I don't know what it is that I do want to do. But I think I kind of like now have kind of come to the idea that I see the harm that religion does, and I want to be a part of trying to at least mitigate that, if not stop it. That's why I'm going to law school. Actually, want to do constitutional law and do that kind of thing, stopping, you know, the establishment of religion and all of these like Christian nationalist like laws and legislation that's coming out now.
Do you feel like that extends in some ways to just the existence of churches? Like if there's Southern Baptist churches out there with people like your dad, and they're meeting on Sunday morning, is that a problem, or is it more just what would be the problem? Where does it become a problem?
I think it's definitely a problem when it starts encroaching in like the government, when they start, pushing Christian nationalist legislation and lobbying for things that are harmful to people based on their religious views. Obviously, that's a source of harm. I think there's still a part of me that does see a harm in like conservative churches like that simply existing. I know I was harmed within, conservative Christianity, and I know I'm not obviously not the only one. So I think a part of me thinks that is still actively a problem, because there are people being harmed within those churches who didn't have a say. I was a kid, I didn't have a choice whether or not I was in that church. But yeah.
Would you envision that there could be a way to have children where the parents aren't making decisions? Because it seems like children are just obviously naive and ignorant about a lot of things that, at the very least, could be dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there's just basic things. It's hard for me to imagine, just because I've had children, that there's some way to raise them with complete neutrality. You're going to try to pass on some wisdom, even moral wisdom. So how would that, wouldn't that in the end be a particular view, whether it's the secular view, the conservative Christian view, the progressive Christian view? How would you avoid that?
Yeah, that is difficult, because there's always going to be some kind of bias. Obviously, like leaving it, I guess kind of leaving it open, not telling your kid like this is what you have to believe. Maybe exposing them to other ideas. I know I was more like, I guess, sheltered from other like opposing viewpoints, and if I ever was exposed to them, then I was immediately told how wrong and sinful they were, and what the more conservative line of how that really should be handled. But I'd say just like leaving them more open to it, getting alternative perspectives. But I don't think there's any way to, obviously you can't completely eradicate that. Like that's going to be a part of it. But as much information as you can give your child without pushing them one way or the other than obviously trying to make sure that they're a decent person, have a good set of, I guess, kind of more across the board morals of just being nice to other people, and then kind of letting them make their choices from there, answering their questions when they ask them. Whenever I ask questions, it was just, well, that's what God says. And that's, we don't question that. We don't question God or the Bible, so there's nothing to be said about it.
Mm-hmm. How do we deal with the fact that there's, like, both sides think certain things harm people, harm children, harm whatever, and their lists of harms, or the way they understand harms, clearly is just different, even sometimes the polarized opposite view. But they're both viewing that the other person is doing the harm. So who gets to adjudicate? How do we adjudicate that when you just have different views of what's the harm?
Yeah, that's definitely difficult. I think generally, like education, the more people are educated on certain issues, I think people fear what they don't understand, and so the more that you can help them understand or potentially see a different perspective, the more likely they are to not demonize it. But I know that like there's nothing that anyone could say or do to my parents that's going to change the way that they think. So I don't know I don't think it's gonna work on a broad scale, other than like protections through like the government. Like, okay, at home that we told this, but at school, they're taught a more like things should be open and accepting, and they're taught both sides. They're taught kind of more a well-rounded thing, I guess.
So you say you weren't quite sure what view do I then take? Do you have a way of describing it? Is there a label or a way of describing your particular worldview now beyond just secular? Or do you say secular humanist? Or because atheism just is a non-belief, right? It's not.
Yeah.
It doesn't really tell you a lot of what someone thinks. But do you, in your own mind, have a way of characterizing what your sort of current view is? It's okay if you don't. I was just curious if you do.
Yeah, I think I just generally think of myself more as just an atheist. I don't believe in. I might even go as far as to say that I'm critical of religion. I think that if you want to believe in, that's between you and whatever. That's not my business. I support that. I just think that there needs to be kind of a critical way that we view things to keep things from, I guess, to keep people like my parents from being able to do as much harm. That it's like you have to view critically the bad things that like conservative Christianity stands for. So I would consider myself an atheist who's critical of religion.
Does have you, now you've been in the atheist world for at least your college career, have you discovered anything that you feel like, oh, there's some negatives on this side of the fence as well?
Yeah, I think some people go too far, and they're like, oh, all religion is evil. I don't think that. I think that there's absolutely, people that do religion in a way that is harmful, obviously. But I think that if someone wants to just have their belief and they keep that to themselves, they're not trying to like push it on their children or other people. They have their beliefs, their community. I think that's good. I think that there's. I think the atheists tend to see anything Christian or religious and can sometimes be like, oh, well, it's automatically bad. Whereas, like, there's good Christian charities, they do, like, food banks, stuff like that, that are actively doing good things, but they're doing it under the label of their religion. And I think that that's obviously fine and good.
The idea that you're going to live forever, that is eternity, that would be a big change, I would think, of your view, because am I correct, you no longer hold that view?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay, I probably should have checked about that.
Yeah.
But because there's usually a sense of hope. Christianity puts a lot of emphasis on hope.
Yeah.
So what replaces that when you're like, okay, I don't really think that's true anymore. So what replaces it? Nothing, or what's different?
Yeah, that's actually something I've been kind of struggling with, because like that definitely was there's still eternity, and it's like, well, no, now I think when people die, they're gone, and that's it. So I do kind of wrestle with that, but I think mostly I just think, well, okay, well, I'll do the best I can while I'm here. I have a limited time, so I'm going to use it to do what I can to help others, and it's kind of motivating me to kind of get out of my shell a little more and live my life, because this is it. There's nothing after this.
Yeah. And is there, how about forgiveness? Like one thing with, I know, Christians put a lot of emphasis on forgiveness, and I wouldn't say that I don't see ever anything like that, but that's not normally the sort of language I see a lot in the SSA convention world or in the AA world or whatever. So is that something that was good about Christianity, that it should be emphasized more in the atheist world, or what do you think about that?
I think there's two sides to it. I think that forgiveness is generally good, like especially for smaller things. Someone did something wrong, but they're asking for forgiveness. They've apologized. They're trying to be better. I think that's generally a good thing. You should forgive people. But I think that there's also a negative, that you should just forgive everyone for everything, no matter how they are moving forward. That it doesn't matter if that person has changed or said they're sorry or is no longer hurting you, you should still forgive them. And I don't think that that's good. I think that that's just you keeping yourself in a toxic or dangerous situation by thinking you have to forgive them no matter what. But I think that generally speaking, forgiveness is good, and it's more for you than the other person. It's a way that you can let go of it.
I know it's the impression people have is that Jesus sort of taught like a universal forgiveness, more or less, or a forgiveness for everything sort of thing. But I mean, he does say a few things about forgiveness that seem like it's, I mean, the very fact that he said you had to repent and believe gives the impression forgiveness isn't just extended, like the famous passage, I think, where Peter asked, what if my brother sins against me, 7 times, do I still forgive him? And Jesus was like, 70 times 7. But he does say if he repents. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, it doesn't seem like he meant, just whatever. But I was just curious if that was something that you thought of is just as motivating now. I suppose if someone did do something, I'm saying myself, but if someone did something that was actually pretty big and bad, but then truly say they repented, or the equivalent of repentance, they
Right.
felt just awful and truly like had a turn, I would think forgiveness would still be an appealing idea. But then, of course, so I guess it all depends on things. Is there anything that do you tend to look back and think, I'm just so glad I just left all that, and just in every way I'm just glad that I'm now with the new community I'm with and the new views I have? Or are there 1 or 2 things that you're like, I do actually kind of miss that?
Yeah, I kind of miss church. Like, not that I believe anymore, or that I think the people that I was around, especially in the kind of churches that I was in, are not people I'd want to be around now, or would want me around for that matter. But that coming together in community, singing hymns, fellowship, like that is something I did enjoy. That was something that was nice, and I think that the secular side of things, it's harder to find community, especially around you. I mean, I came here for this, but where I live in Richmond, Kentucky. It's in the Bible Belt. There isn't that much community for secularism, so it's like, I guess, kind of feeling like I'm missing out on that community aspect and that connection.
Yeah, and so like if you're hearing Amazing Grace sung, do you sometimes go, oh yeah, I really like that song? I mean, a lot of people like it whether they're
Yeah,
Christian
I
or
have
not.
mixed feelings about a lot of those songs. Like, I like the song. I think the song sounds nice, but then I think about the words, and I don't agree with the words. Or I think when I was trying to figure out who I was and realizing that I was gay, I would not just read the Bible to try and pray the gay way, but I would sing hymns. Because if you reach out and praise to God, He'll help, whatever. And so I would sing hymns then, and at the time that was comforting. And I think they still have a little bit of comfort, but I think it's connected with me with those other bad memories that I can't really enjoy it anymore.
Yeah. Great. I mean, great meaning. I appreciate the interview. Appreciate what you're saying, and really glad to have had a conversation with you, and hope you enjoy the SSA conference.
Thank you.